welcome back to another video here on Free Will Photos. Today, what we're going to do is move from ON1 Photo Raw into Adobe Photoshop. Now, the same context that I'm going to show you, or concept I should say, will work moving into Affinity Photo and other editing applications. But I think that it's worthwhile for those of you who may be working inside of Lightroom and Photoshop to be able to move from ON1 if you are using ON1 as your digital asset manager, or you started an image somewhere in there and want to get over to Photoshop. Now, before we go into that, I do have to warn you, there are two things you need to be aware of. The first one is you will no longer have a raw file when you are moving between ON1 into Photoshop. Photoshop has to work with JPEGs or a rastered image of some sort, which means it can no longer be raw. It needs to be in JPEG, TIFF, or PNG. So part of this is going to be a conversion. And for that, then you need to know how your files are being converted when you open them into Photoshop. So let's go ahead and jump into the computer and take a look at our preferences of what we're sending into Photoshop or any other external plugin whenever we use this technique. All right, so here we are inside of ON1 Photo Raw, and I have a photo of this gentleman here that we're going to be moving here in a little bit. But before we get there, we need to take a look at our preferences. So what I'm going to do is click on ON1 Photo Raw up here and go to Preferences. This may be under Edit if you're on a PC. I trust that everyone knows how to navigate to their own preferences files. So when you get here, what you're going to do is click on Files. At the very top here, you're going to be met with the prompt that tells ON1 how to send your file to these external programs. Right now, I'm telling ON1 to send a TIFF file. You have three choices: PSD, which is going to support layers. So if you're working with layers inside of ON1 Photo Raw and you want to send those to an external editor, this is the one that you may want to select. Be careful with this. It doesn't always work perfectly, which is why I personally like to send a compressed version, if you will, of everything that I've done in ON1, sending that over to Photoshop or Affinity Photo. And then, of course, you have TIFF and JPEG, neither of which support layers. So really, you have to ask the question, how do you want to send this? If you're working with layers and you want to have access to the layers when you go into Affinity Photo or Photoshop, you may want to select PSD. If you don't care about that, then I recommend using TIFF. That's going to be the best quality image that you're sending into these programs. It's the reason why I select TIFF. Now, color space, this is one of those things that is heavily debated and contested. I personally leave it on Adobe RGB 1998. I know a lot of people, they like to say, well, you should be in Pro Photo. Look, don't worry about it. Choose the one that makes sense for what your project offers. I think 99.9% of us are going to be using Adobe RGB, so I leave it there. I will recommend leaving it on 16-bit, or if it's on 8-bit, to move it to 16-bit. And then resolution, if you want the best resolution, I recommend 300 pixels per inch, or PPI. I don't even know what PPC stands for. If you know, let me know in the comment section below. But once you have this set, the good news is it is set, it's ready to go. You don't really have to worry about it that much more. All right. Now, there is this option down here where it says show these options every time. And that's in reference to whenever you use the technique I'm going to show you. If you want to verify these options every single time, then you should check this, or hit the little click on it, get the bubble in there. It'll tell ON1 this should always show up. I personally don't want it to always show up because I trust that TIFF, Adobe RGB 1998, 16-bit, 300 PPI works out fine, and it does. So I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. And now here's how we get it into Adobe Photoshop. We're going to right click on the image in question that we want to send. And then down here at the bottom, assuming you have Photoshop installed. If you don't have it installed, then this isn't going to work. You got to make sure you have it installed. Then you'll go ahead and click Send to Adobe Photoshop 2024, which is the version that I'm using. So once your image loads into Photoshop, it's off to the races of whatever it is that you want it to do inside of Photoshop that you weren't able to do inside of On1. One of those things is adding a gradient map. So that's what I'm going to do right now. I am going to go ahead and click on the adjustments down here, click gradient map. It's going to pop a gradient map over my image. That's not the gradient map that I want. So I'm going to go ahead and click in the properties over here. And let's see about adding in, maybe we'll look at some oranges in here. Maybe we'll add this. Have no idea what this is. I'm just throwing something on here. We'll hit OK. And then I'll change my blend mode probably over to color or something. And now I get like this cool sepia tone effect, but I have the ability to kind of modify this the way that I want it to be modified. So, you know, the beauty of working with a gradient map, and then I can double click here, and maybe in the mid tones, I want something that's a little bit darker, or maybe I want something completely random, like this blue. Maybe it'll just be like a hint of blue. And this is where color grading and this really becomes kind of fun. You can mess around with this. Again, I can do all kinds of stuff. The only reason I'm demonstrating this is because I want to show you what happens after you're done. So I'm going to go ahead and leave this quite strong. So I'll leave it to about 66. I think that that looks good. I love working with gradient maps. I can do all kinds of stuff. There's one thing that I wanted to do. So now when I hit Command and S to save, I get this dialog box here. Remember, I exported this into a TIFF. So now I have to make some choices with the TIFF file. I'll be honest with you. I don't know what all of these choices mean. However, here's what I leave checked. And if you know more about TIFF files and what makes sense or have some resources, please let me know in the comment section below. It'll just help the community. But what I'll do is I leave none checked and pixel. In fact, for the sake of not telling you everything, I leave everything just like it is when it pops up in Photoshop. My assumption is that the same thing happens with Affinity Photo. I'm going to hit OK. This is going to save. You can see down here in the bottom left-hand corner. Now, once this saves, it looks like nothing happened. But if I minimize this, okay, so once you get back into On1 Photo Raw, what you may need to do is actually search for that TIFF file. And since it is not as uniquely named, what I'm going to do is just come in here and I'm going to go by file type. And instead of raw, I'm just going to put is TIFF. And it should be one of these TIFF files that pop up. And sometimes the preview takes a little while, but the image is actually in here, and there it is. So now what I can do is double click on this. It'll open up into edit, and I can make modifications to the file however I see fit, like a normal edit with a new image. So there you have a way of moving between On1 Photo Raw to Adobe Photoshop, do some color gradient, some color grading, if you will, using the gradient map tool, along with other things. So if you're into using the AI tools of uh, AI fill and generative fill and stuff like that, then go for it. You have that opportunity. You now know how to do it. Otherwise, if you're just going to Affinity Photo, you want to pop in a gradient map so that way you can really own the colors in your image, then this is also a great way of doing it. I'd love to answer any questions or comments about this technique down in the comment section below. And with that, I hope you guys have a great day. And until next time, I want you to stay inspired and keep creating. Peace.